What is genetics? Genetics is the study of genes, variation, and heredity in living organisms. Genetics is usually considered as field of biology. The principles of genetics were first time explained by a scientist whose name was Gregor Mendel. When Gregor Mendel was formulating the laws of heredity, at that time he was unaware about the concept of chromosomes, gene, or the mutation. Genetics can be studied in two different ways. One way is called as reverse genetics, while the second method is called as forward genetics. If we want to study genetics in a reverse pattern, then a researcher or a geneticist have to select a particular gene, then certain mutations have to created in that gene, and then phenotype have to identified based on the mutation that were created in a particular gene. If this methodology is used to study the genetics, then it is called as reverse genetics. While in case of forward genetics, a geneticist or a researcher have to first identify the phenotype, then based on the phenotype, certain mutants or for certain genes, they are screened, and ultimately a particular gene is identified that is causing mutation or that is the responsible for a specific phenotype. So there are two ways of studying the genetics. One is called as reverse genetics and second one is called as forward genetics. If we say that how we can study genotype based on the phenotype, then it is called as classical genetics or forward genetics. Usually it is performed by sequencing the DNA. While if a geneticist or a person want to study genetics in a reverse pattern or in a reverse genetics, then phenotype is identified based on the genotype. There are different methodologies which are used for studying the reverse pattern of the genetics. Those methodologies, they are positional cloning, RNA interference, gene knockouts, and there are different other methods which are used to study the phenotype based on the genotype. Mendel is considered as father of the genetics. For formulating the laws of heredity or the principles of heredity, Gregor Mendel used garden pea as an experimental plant. There were many properties in that experimental plant, mean the garden pea. We will see what were the properties in the garden pea that Mendel used for formulating the laws of heredity. Garden pea, the seed of garden pea is available in many varieties. Usually this plant self-pollinate as well as cross-pollinate. This plant takes little space, mean within a little space one can grow this plant. This plant has short generation time, mean within 2 to 3 months one can grow and can get the seeds of this plant. This plant produces many offsprings at a time. So if we list that there are many characteristics, that these characteristics, they help to the Mendel for performing the experiments as well as for formulation of the laws of the Mendel. Usually it is said that Mendel was fortunate because why he was fortunate, he selected garden pea as an experimental plant because pea plant was available in many varieties. When Mendel was performing the experiments of genetics at that time, he had strict control over different plants that he mated, as well as the traits of the garden pea. They were clearly contrasting and they were clearly distinct from each other. So these were the major properties that helped the Gregor Mendel for the formulation of the laws of heredity. This is the list of those characteristics or those properties of the garden pea. If we list them one by one, flower color was purple and white. Flower position was axial and terminal. The seed color was present in yellow color as well as in green. The shape of the seed was round as well as wrinkled. If we see the pod shape, that was present in inflated form as well as constricted form, and the color of the pod, that was green as well as yellow. And some of the plants, they were tall, and some plants they were short. So these were all those characteristics which were present in the garden pea. So at the end, we can conclude that what is genetics? Genetics is the study of genes, chromosomes, and heredity. So that is the definition of the genetics and concept of the genetics.